I'm Christy Shriver, and we're here to discuss books that have changed the world and have changed us.
And I'm Gary Shriver, and this is the How to Love Lit podcast. This is episode 2 of what will be a 3-part series on Katherine Mansfield and 2 of her most famous short stories. Last week, we introduced Mansfield, noting that she is one of the English language's great short story writers, especially from around the turn of the 20th century. We mentioned that she was from New Zealand, but really we honed in on her technique and the reasons her work stood out over time and how she originally rose to international fame. Today, we will jump a little back in time and travel across the ocean to meet her in her homeland, the idyllic New Zealand, and read what one of her most beloved short stories is about, labeled The Garden Party.
Well, I love that The Garden Party is set in her homeland, and that's one difference between it and Miss Brill, the story that we read last episode, because that story was set in France. But Gary, for those of us who have never been to New Zealand, what makes it unique, and how might it change how we understand how we read the story if we know a little bit about the place where it's set?
Well, I don't know if we need to know anything really to understand the story that we're about to read. I've learned that from literature for sure. Okay. But I will say, knowing a little bit about how it was colonized and the circumstances of her birth, that gives people like me a framework as to what might have interested Mansfield enough about her childhood experiences to really inspire the story.
Well, and although I've not read anywhere that this is a straight biographical story about a particular event that is documented to have happened to her in this specific way, it very well might be. I mean, she did pull from her own experiences, as you have brought out a lot of authors do.
Indeed. I can't imagine that they wouldn't. But let's talk about New Zealand. New Zealand stands out among the other British colonies in that it was a settler colony. And what that means is that unlike Nigeria or India, British citizens didn't go there to extract diamonds or take natural resources. They just went there to settle. And when they settled, they wanted to recreate British society. And this is something that we're going to see in the story. But in case you don't know, New Zealand is far. I mean, it's very far from Britain. It's over 12,000 miles to be exact. And this was difficult, to say the least, for a lot of people, and especially if they were like Mansfield and wanted to be close to the action. And the action was in London, and London was the center of the world, and the center of the world's 12,000 miles away. I mean, it's incredible that a little girl from New Zealand made her way to the big stage in the UK.
Or that she even knew that it was there.
Right. It's very impressive. And of course, she was an extraordinary person with that big rock star personality that couldn't be contained. But there's certainly a story behind how she made the jump, and it wasn't an easy one. And I will say, Katherine may have disagreed with this, but New Zealand wasn't a bad place for a progressive woman to be from at the turn of the 20th century. It was forward-thinking in a lot of ways. For example, it was the first country to give women the right to vote, which they got in 1893.
How does that compare to the U.S.?
Well, we came around in about 1920.
Okay.
The UK was a little bit ahead of us in 1918, but really only for women over 30 that meeting certain property qualifications. Women just had more social mobility in New Zealand, with more educational opportunities and more freedom. And, don't get me wrong, it was still very Victorian, but it just wasn't as tradition heavy as Britain was, and it couldn't be. I mean, the entire country was new, and it was so removed from that part of the world.
Well, and that kind of makes sense, honestly. I guess, newness sparks, in many ways, artistic talent. And a lot of people are surprised when they find out that for a country with less than 6 million people and over 26 million sheep, everyone always talks about the sheep.
That's a lot.
Yeah, well, it's a disproportionate number of sheep per person, but there's also a disproportionate number of artists that have really emerged from there in a bunch of different fields. And that's kind of an impressive collection. New Zealanders over the years have really made an impact on the world scene.
Well, Perhaps the most famous creative New Zealander that I know of is not a writer, but a movie producer, Peter Jackson, and he won 11 Academy Awards, and most of his awards over the years have been associated with the Lord of the Rings series, but I want to mention his extraordinary piece of nonfiction that may be as impressive as Lord of the Rings, and that's his World War I documentary titled "They Shall Not Grow Old." He took archived World War I film footage and developed it using modern techniques and technologies, and including figuring out what soldiers were even saying to each other while they were being filmed. I mean, it's obviously sad, but it's also one of the most fascinating documentaries that you'll ever watch, but maybe I digress a little bit, but I was very impressed with it.
Well, it's a digression, but okay. I've never been to New Zealand, although like a lot of places, it's definitely on my bucket list, but I've had friends who've been there a few times, and they tell me that when you land, they welcome you to Middle Earth, and you know that right when you get off the plane.
Do they serve you second breakfast?
Oh, I don't know, but that would be a good idea.
Mm. Nature is so dominant there. It's dramatic for such a small place, and we can see it when we watch the Lord of the Rings movies, but honestly, we can even see it in Mansfield's stories that are set in her home, and the landscapes are unique and unusual. They have dense forests that look really Jurassic Park-like with trees that live over 1,000 years, and there are active volcanoes and steep cliffs, and one unusual fact is that there were no native land mammals until humans arrived there and brought them. It's a land of all kinds of birds, like the kiwi, which acts like a rodent, and the kia, that's famous for solving puzzles, and the tui, which can mimic sounds, including human ones. And, so there's a few fun facts about the nature.
Well, I really do wanna go and visit Middle Earth. I mean, it's not quite as far from Memphis to New Zealand as it is from New Zealand to London. I Googled it, and I think we're a close 9,000
Oh,
miles
well, that's a
from
day trip.
it's a bit of a haul. But having said that, I'm Mansfield probably never heard of Memphis, Tennessee. It would be a few more years, I think, after her life that Elvis would put that our town on the map, but now I'm digressing. Anyway, let's talk about Katherine Mansfield's New Zealand, and let's talk about where she was born. The New Zealand of 1884 would be a very different place, obviously, from the New Zealand of today, and a very different culture. May I add again also that she was the third child of Harold and Annie Beauchamp, who would go on to have four daughters and a son. Their son, unfortunately, and we'll talk about this next episode, would die in World War One, the one that Peter Jackson documented.
And at the time, New Zealand was a colony of the British Empire under Queen Victoria. Yeah, at that time, with around 500,000 people, and like other colonized countries, the English who settled New Zealand recreated English towns and cities and villages with English names. I mean, its entire economy was based on sheep farming and exporting that to Britain.
Well, and her parents, they were of that world. I mean, her father, Harold Beauchamp, was one of New Zealand's most successful merchants and bankers, and he was the chairman of the Bank of New Zealand twice. And he and his wife, Annie, were very socially conscious, and they put a lot of pressure on their children to be so. And like all the other wealthy families at the time, they sent their older daughters back to London to attend Queen's College. And it wasn't necessarily because they wanted scholarly children, but this was the thing to do. And by doing that, they could enhance their own social standings and maybe enhance their daughter's chances of making a good marriage. So, none of this that I'm just describing is unusual for the time period. After graduating, the daughters returned home. And again, this is not unusual, but as sometimes happens, not all of their daughters were ready to settle down, especially when we're thinking about they were just in London and now they're in what they consider to be this isolated place, their homeland, New Zealand. So for Catherine, she felt after having been to London and then brought back to New Zealand, just away, far away from the center of the world, and she didn't feel like she was suited to the conservative colonial lifestyle of New Zealand, and she found New Zealand boring and her parents' life dull after all of her experiences, and so as a result.
This is the Chase Sapphire Lounge at Boston Logan. You got clam chowder. In New York, Dirty Martini. Over 1,300 airport lounges and one card that gets you in. Chase Sapphire Reserve, now even more rewarding.
Learn more at chase.com/Sapphire Reserve. Cards issued by JP Morgan Chase Bank and a member FDIC, subject to credit approval.
The to-do list doesn't stop, and neither does the pressure to keep up with it. If you've been running on fumes, Grow Therapy makes it easier to find care that's covered by insurance and actually built around you. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/ACAST today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/ACAST. growtherapy.com/ACAST. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Almost immediately after arriving home, she started running into conflicts with her parents and kind of acting out, so to speak, in kind of rebellious ways. And one way that she did this was by engaging in a lesbian relationship with a Maori friend. So, Gary, we can all see why that would have been scandalous for this kind of this
True.
kind of person. But let's talk about the Maori people. I mean, who are these people, and why would that even be worse than just engaging in a romantic relationship with another woman or girl?
The Maoris were and are an indigenous people. They are said to have arrived in New Zealand around 800 BC from a mythical land called Hawaii. Their language has been an official language of New Zealand since 1987. But the bottom line, they are traditional people living in New Zealand before the arrival of the British. And what's important to note is that many of the English at the time considered them uncivilized and savages and crude and uncultured and wild.
So Mansfield was aware of this, obviously, and later on she would criticize this attitude. But perhaps not surprising for a teenager, she involved herself with them against what she knew would be the finer sensibilities of her parents.
Well, you know, it's not hard calculus to understand. If you wanted to rebel against your parents, and if they were socially conscious British subjects at the turn of the 19th century New Zealand, having a lesbian relationship with a Maori girl would do the trick. And it did.
Oh, it did. And after her parents found out about it, they agreed. Yes, okay, go back to London. You can go alone. And she did at the age of 20. In theory, to study music. And she was an accomplished cellist. And she really could have turned that into a profession. But the music was the pretense. They needed her to get out of town. She was embarrassing the family. And this was all understood, but a win for young Catherine. She wanted out of New Zealand, so back to London she goes. Her dad would finance her life. That was the deal, but it would be modest. She only got around £100 a year, and that's currency, not like pounds of sugar.
So 100 pounds would have been sufficient to live on, but really not enough to live lavishly. And it put her in this kind of middle space where she came from money and she knew money, but she didn't really have a lot of money of her own.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, she found herself in this, we can see in her stories, really between worlds. And she was very aware how money divides the world. And it's an idea that comes up in a lot of her stories, including the garden party, When she got back there to London, she adopted this very specific persona. She was intense, she was witty, she was bohemian, known for risk taking, cynical, and of course, sexually promiscuous. And this turned out to eventually lead her to contracting gonorrhea, a disease that would really plague her and really be responsible for ending her life. She did quite a few things, though, in her short time in London, including meeting and then marrying and then leaving a man, all in a matter of a few days, a man by the name of George Bowden. She got pregnant around that time, presumably by him, but maybe not. And that pregnancy resulted in a miscarriage. She most famously and most importantly really involved herself with another woman in what would be a lesbian relationship by the name of Ida Baker. She had originally met Baker in King's College, but when Catherine came back to London, she sought her out. And Catherine renamed Ida Leslie, and that Leslie re-entered her life. And in many ways, but Ida would be the one to take care of Catherine for the rest of her life. When Catherine's mother, Annie, found out about the extent of their relationship and the likely sexual nature, she very famously cut Catherine out of the will. But Ida and Catherine would remain close, and they were, for the remainder of Catherine's short life.
Oh, that's a lot of turmoil crammed into one short life.
Oh, I know. And then there's a sense that it feels really reckless, and maybe it was, and she paid for that. But the bright side for us is that amid all of this ongoing drama, Catherine also started to write. She began to write for a man, A.R. Orange, who had this magazine titled New Age. I mean, this magazine was edgy, it was progressive, it was anti-Catholic, anti-democratic, socialist, all the cool things. 3 years later, she met a man through these literary circles who would be the man to turn her into a literary icon, John Middleton Murray. Now, their relationship was never healthy and filled with pain. It's been described as, quote, crucial and largely unfortunate because it was from here and through this relationship that her writing took off to get to the collection that we're going to read from today and where we read last week, The Garden Party and Other Stories. So she wrote the stories in Europe, but most of them are reflections and they're inspired by her childhood and they're set in New Zealand, including the one we'll start reading today. It's a little long, so we'll have to finish it next week. But it's a story of innocence for sure. And it seems simple, but it's not. You can read it over and over again, and it has a lot to say embedded in the simple plot. It's about politics. It's about social class. It's about growing up.
Robert Little called her a genius, and he said this: she is a connoisseur of the ripples that mean so much more than waves, a collector of little emotions caught on the wing, never pinned or bottled in her pages, but kept alive there in all their fragile, iridescent colors. That's quite a compliment.
Well, and I think he's right, because just like Miss Brill, the story is 100% seeped in realism. It's not exactly plotless like the last one, but it's not what I would call plot heavy. The meaning of the story is not embedded in the plot. It's in the characters, it's in the setting, but more importantly, it's embedded in the symbolism, as a lot of these turn of the century stories are. There's another epiphany, but it's very different. So, are we ready?
Let's do it. And after all the weather was ideal, they could not have had a more perfect day for a garden party if they had ordered it. Windless, warm, the sky without a cloud. Only the blue was veiled with a haze of light gold, as it is sometimes in early summer. The gardener had been up since dawn, mowing the lawns and sweeping them until the grass and the dark flat rosettes where the daisy plants had been seemed to shine. As for the roses, you could not help feeling they understood that roses are the only flowers that impress people at garden parties, the only flowers that everybody is certain of knowing. Hundreds, yes, literally hundreds, had come out in a single night. The green bushes bowed down as though they had been visited by archangels. Breakfast was not yet over before the men came to put up the marquee. "Where do you want the marquee put, Mother?" "My dear child, it's no use asking me. I'm determined to leave everything to you children this year. Forget I'm your mother. Treat me as an honored guest. But Meg could not possibly go and supervise the men. She had washed her hair before breakfast, and she sat drinking her coffee in a green turban with a dark wet curl stamped on each cheek. Josie, the butterfly, always came down in a silk petticoat and a kimono jacket. You'll have to go, Laura. You're the artistic one. Away Laura flew, still holding her piece of bread and butter. It's so delicious to have an excuse for eating out of doors, and besides, she loved having to arrange things. She always felt that she could do it so much better than anybody else.
So let's talk about this. I mean, remember, every time you read a new story, no matter what, whether it's a short story, a novel, even a movie, what you're doing is entering into a world that you're totally unfamiliar with. I mean, you're being dropped in this new place that the author is creating, and he's inviting you into the world. If it's a piece of writing, in your imagination, you have to build up the reality. You have to make the movie that he's painting before you. So, to where has Mansfield transported us? Well, we are in a garden. She calls it ideal. Now, what an interesting word. And think of it like this: we're in Eden, to use a biblical allusion. Now, knowing that she's a modernist writer, and she is, we know that she may be prone to use a lot of symbols in her work, and she does. At this point, we can't be sure if the garden is a symbol, but we know a couple of things from our prior knowledge of literature. First, gardens are often archetypes. That means they're universal symbols that people have used all over the world across cultures. Now, not every garden is an archetype, but it might be. And as an archetype, gardens often represent innocence, purity, harmony, the state of man or of the world before the fall, like in the story of Genesis in the Bible. But there's a suspicion that this might be a symbol because of how much time she's devoted to describing it. There is quite a lot of description, and the descriptions kind of support this idea of perfection because this garden is perfect. It's cultivated. It's beyond beautiful. There was even a Bible word used, but there are literally hundreds of roses.
And yet, I detect a slight hint of sarcasm.
Always.
It's not Eden because Eden was cultivated by God, but in this case, a gardener who has been up since dawn, mowing and sweeping the garden to perfection. And when the narrator talks about them, she switches to the second person, telling us that the purpose of roses is to impress people, as if the purpose of this garden is to impress people, which, of course, is not the proper purpose of a garden. I mean, a garden, at least a flower garden, is meant to be a sanctuary, kind of a place of peace. And she throws in another biblical word, archangels, but it also rings a little sarcastically to me. And archangels in the Bible are mighty warriors. These are commanding the roses. And it's really kind of an interesting turn of phrase.
Correct. And there are more workers besides the gardener. There are men bringing in a marquee. Now, marquee is not a word we normally use, at least not around here. We might use a different word like tent or canopy, but marquee, like the ones that they're talking about here, are big, and they're the things that people use at big fancy events or weddings. Most of us don't throw parties with marquees or canopies this big in our backyard unless, we're throwing a wedding. But this isn't a wedding. It's just a garden party. So what does that tell us? We know these people are rich. They're really rich. And they have manufactured Eden in their backyard. This is a paradise, and they've built it in the backyard. We also learn the name of our protagonist, presumably Laura. The mom and Meg have both dumped this responsibility for the garden party on her. Now, notice Meg's excuse isn't even a very good one. I mean, her hair's wet. But I want to point out one more thing. We now see that Mansfield is using free indirect discourse. Now, we've talked about this technique before, and it's important to notice, so I want to bring it up again. The story is being narrated by an outside narrator. This is not Laura telling her own story. There's clearly an outside narrator telling us the story. All the characters are being watched from the outside, but we get this privileged.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings by $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
The to-do list doesn't stop, and neither does the pressure to keep up with it. If you've been running on fumes, Grow Therapy makes it easier to find care that's covered by insurance and actually built around you. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/ACAST today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/ACAST. growtherapy.com/ACAST. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
Position with Laura. We get to see her consciousness. We go inside her mind, and we're not going into the side of the minds of the other people. So even though this story is still in the third person, we are looking at it from Laura's point of view. She's in a good mood. She's happy to get outside. She loves arranging things, and she feels confident in herself. She says she can do things better than other people.
4 men in their shirt sleeves stood grouped together on the garden path. They carried staves covered with rolls of canvas, and they had big tool bags slung on their backs. They looked impressive. Laura wished now that she had not got the bread and butter, but there was nowhere to put it, and she couldn't possibly throw it away. She blushed and tried to look severe and even a little bit short-sighted as she came up to them. "Good morning," she said, copying her mother's voice. But that sounded so fearfully affected that she was ashamed and stammered like a little girl. Have you come? Is it about the marquis?" "That's right, miss," said the tallest of the men, a lanky, freckled fellow, and he shifted his tool bag, knocked back his straw hat, and he smiled down at her. "That's about it." His smile was so easy, so friendly that Laura recovered. What nice eyes he had, small, but such a dark blue. And now she looked at the others. They were smiling too. "Cheer up, we won't bite," their smile seemed to say. How very nice workmen were, and what a beautiful morning. She mustn't mention the morning. She must be businesslike. The marquis. "Well, what about the lily lawn? Would that do?" And she pointed to the lily lawn with that hand that didn't hold the bread and butter. They turned, they stared in that direction. A little fat chap thrust out his underlip, and a tall fellow frowned. "I don't fancy it," said he. "Not conspicuous enough. You see, with a thing like a marquee," and he turned to Laura in his easy way, "you want to put it somewhere where it'll give you a bang slap in the eye, if you follow me." Laura's upbringing made her wonder for a moment whether it was quite respectful of a workman to talk to her a bang slap in the eye, but she did quite follow him.
So, Gary, what are your thoughts through a psychological lens or a historical lens? Do you make any observations, worthy of note?
Oh, well, probably the most obvious is Laura's self-awareness and her class consciousness at this point. I mean, she's intrigued by these men, and they're strange to her, and although they don't frighten her, the idea of talking to them very much does. And she knows and doesn't know her place in this world, and we can see she doesn't know how she feels about all that. And I can totally see this being the real perspective of a little child like Katherine Mansfield. But on the other hand, we see the workman's point of view. The things Laura observes tells us that they understand what's going on. They know this little rich girl is totally lost. They don't resent her. They're kind to her. They help her. And it's funny that the phrase bang, slap in the eye seemed vulgar to her, and she's not used to such language. And the only other thing, and I noticed this probably because we just finished the other story, where clothing is so important, is that the workman is described as wearing a straw hat, something that tells us that he knows how to protect himself working out in the hot sun all day.
Right, thank you for those comments. A corner of the tennis court, she suggested, but the band's going to be in one quarter. Gonna have a band, are you? Said another of the workmen. He was pale. He had a haggard look at his dark eyes scan the tennis court. What was he thinking? Only a very small band, said Laura gently. Perhaps he wouldn't mind so much if the band was quite small. But the tall fellow interrupted. Look here, miss, that's the place, against those trees, over there. That'll do fine. Against the caracas? Then the caraca trees would be hidden, and they were so lovely with their broad, gleaming leaves and their clusters of yellow fruit. They were like trees you imagined growing on a desert island, proud, solitary, lifting their leaves and fruits to the sun in a kind of silent splendor. Must they be hidden by a marquee? They must. Already the men had shouldered their staves and were making for the place. Only the tall fellow was left, and he bent down, pinched a sprig of lavender, put his thumb and forefinger to his nose, snuffed up the smell. When Laura saw that gesture, she forgot all about the caracas in her wonder at him caring for things like that, caring for the smell of lavender. How many men that she knew would have done such a thing? Oh, how extraordinarily nice workmen were, she thought. Why couldn't she have workmen for her friends rather than the silly boys she danced with and who came on Sunday night supper? She would get on much better with men like these. It's all the fault, she decided, as the tall fellow drew something on the back of an envelope, something that was to be looped up or left to hang, of these absurd class distinctions. Well, for her part, she didn't feel them, not a bit, not an atom. And now they came, the chock-chock of wooden hammers. Someone whistled, someone sang. Are you right there, matey, matey? The friendliness of it. Just to prove how happy she was, just to show the tall fellow how at home she felt and how she despised stupid conventions. Laura took a big bite of her bread and butter as she stared at the little drawing. She felt just like a work girl.
Mansfield is not letting us overlook this emphasis that she's placing on social classes, and it bothers little Laura, and it bothers her because it separates people, and the other class is mysterious to her, and she's romanticized it. She imagines being a working girl, and she admires how the men work, especially this interaction with the lavender. It was so charming.
Well, and anyone who actually works knows that working girls don't do what she does, sit around eating bread and butter while other people work. But I also want to point out a couple of other things, about the vegetation, because I think it's clear Mansfield is using these things symbolically. And lilies and lavenders, these are common symbols, and we see them in a lot of stories. Even Shakespeare uses things. But let's talk about the lily. Lilies represent purity and beauty, but sometimes lilies represent death. They're often used as funeral flowers. But lilies are not native to New Zealand. They have to be brought in from the outside and planted in this garden. That's true for lavender as well. Lavender is a traditional flower in a European garden, and it does smell nice, which, of course, a lot of us know. It's in essential oils that a lot of us buy and have in our homes. I do want to point out, though, that this fact that these two things came from the outside is in contrast to the tree that she was pointing at. Gary, what is a caraca tree?
Well, thank you for regarding me as an expert in New Zealand horticulture, but, you've likely not heard of them because the caraca tree is native in New Zealand, and it's actually traditionally important to the Maori community. All of the berries can be toxic if you eat them raw, so don't do that. But having said that, what strikes me about them here is they are hidden in favor of a band. The karaka tree is the only thing in the story native to New Zealand, and they want to hide it. And I have to think she's trying to make a political comment here. The native tree, the one that represents the Maori people, is getting pushed out.
Well, there you go, Mr. Schreiber. You're talking like a lit teacher, not a history.
Symbolism.
Yes. Mansfield also mentions that she does not appreciate what she calls, well, what Laura says are absurd class distinctions. So, in case you weren't clever enough to pick up that reference with the tree being pushed out like the native people, she is just going to say it outright. Mansfield wants us to know that she's making a statement about her feelings about the divisions that we make among people, and those involve social classes. So, let's keep reading, and I'll pick it up. Laura, where are you? Telephone, Laura, a voice cried from the house. Coming. And away she skimmed over the lawn, up the path, up the steps, across the veranda, and into the porch. In the hall, her father and Laurie were brushing their hats ready to go to the office. I say, Laura, said Laurie very fast, you might just give a squiz at my coat before this afternoon. See if it wants pressing. I will, said she. Suddenly, she couldn't stop herself. She ran at Laurie and gave him a small, quick squeeze. Oh, I do love parties, don't you? Gasped Laura. Rather, said Laurie's warm, boyish voice, and he squeezed his sister too and gave her a gentle push. Dash off to the telephone, old girl.
All right, let's stop here for just a minute. Am I to understand that the sister is named Laura and the brother is named Laurie? Is that right?
Correct.
This is like Wuthering Heights.
I know. The telephone. Yes. Oh, yes, Kitty. Good morning, dear. Come to lunch. Oh, do, dear. Delighted, of course. It will only be a very scratch meal, just the sandwich crust and broken meringue shells, and that's what's left over. Yes, it's a perfect morning. You're white? Oh, I certainly should. One moment. Hold the line. Mother's calling. And Laura sat back. What, Mother? Can't hear. Mrs. Sheridan's voice floated down the stairs. Tell her to wear that sweet hat that she had on last Sunday. Mother says you're to wear that sweet hat you had on last Sunday. Good. 1 o'clock. Bye-bye.
And so now we see Mother being called Mrs. Sheridan instead of Mother. This obviously is a deliberate choice, but it seems a little confusing. For a second, I had to think about who Mrs. Sheridan is in the story and that she's the same person as Mother.
Right. It's a very deliberate choice, and you are supposed to catch it. It's very modern because Mansfield is shifting the perspective on purpose. She's trying to pull us out of the story. She's highlighting Miss Sheridan's position in this role, her world. She's white, she's upper class, she's the lady of the house, she's in charge. And Mrs. Sheridan is a much more formal way to address the same person. And by changing how she references her, Mansfield reminds us very subtly that Mrs. Sheridan is not just part of a social structure. She's in charge. She's at the top. She's commanding. And look what she does. Through the phone, and as you've told us in other episodes, this time period is marked by industrialization, technological changes. We see that. The phone, in other words, technology is being used to control, but also it creates a distance between, these people. One is in charge, and she's using technology to affect change and command what's going on. You notice Mrs. Sheridan is telling people through the phone what to wear. And you have pointed out this very episode, and we've seen it before. Clothes identify us. They tell others who we are in the world. And in this story, just like in Miss Brill, they're carrying some sort of symbolism. And what is she telling the young girl? To wear a hat, but to wear the right hat.
Laura put back the receiver, flung her arms over her head, took a deep breath, stretched out and let them fall. Huh, she sighed, and the moment after the sigh, she sat up quickly. She was still listening. All the doors in the house seemed to be open. The house was alive with soft, quick steps and running voices. The green beige door that led to the kitchen region swung open and shut with a muffled thud. And now there came a long, chuckling, absurd sound. It was the heavy piano being moved on its stiff casters. But the air, If you stop to notice, was the air always like this? Little faint winds were playing chase in at the tops of the windows, out at the doors, and there were two tiny spots of sun, one on the inkpot, one on a silver photograph frame, playing too. Darling little spots, especially the one on the inkpot lid. It was quite warm, a warm little silver star. She could have kissed it. The front doorbell pealed, and there sounded the rustle of Sadie's print skirt on the stairs. A man's voice murmured. Sadie answered, careless. I'm sure I don't know. Wait, I'll ask Mrs. Sheridan. What is it, Sadie? Laura came into the hall. It's the florist, Miss Laura. It was indeed. There, just inside the door, stood a wide, shallow tray full of pots of pink lilies. No other kind, nothing but lilies. Canna lilies, big pink flowers, wide open, radiant, almost frighteningly alive on bright crimson stems. Oh, Sadie, said Laura, and the sound was like a little moan. She crouched down as if to warm herself at that blaze of lilies. She felt they were in her fingers, on her lips, growing in her breast. It's some mistake, she said faintly. Nobody ever ordered so many. Sadie, go and find Mother. But at that moment, Mrs. Sheridan joined them. It's quite right, she said calmly. Yes, I ordered them. Aren't they lovely? She pressed Laura's arm. I was passing the shop yesterday, and I saw them in the window, and I suddenly thought for once in my life I shall have enough canna lilies. The garden party will be a good excuse. But I thought you said you didn't mean to interfere, said Laura. Sadie had gone. The florist man was still outside at his van. She put her arm around her mother's neck and gently, very gently, she bit her mother's ear. My darling child, you wouldn't like a logical mother, would you? Don't do that. Here's the man. He carried more lilies still, another whole tray. Bank them up just inside the door on both sides of the porch, please, said Mrs. Sheridan.
Again, more description and more flowers, lots of pretty flowers for the garden. I just want to make one more comment about tone and mood. Mansfield spends quite a bit of time talking about the air in this story, which is kind of weird, really. We don't really think of air mattering. It really only matters when it's heavy. But air affects our mood, and in this case, she does it to reflect how people feel. At the beginning of the story, we're told it's windless. Now there are faint winds, but it's refreshing, it's pleasant. She says there are tiny spots of fun playing amidst the air. She could have kissed the sunspots on the furniture. Everything about the Sheridan's environment is perfect, beautiful, pleasant, down to the light shining through and down to the air. The other line I really like is when Laura kind of calls her mother out for pretending to not be in charge, but actually being in charge and calling and ordering more flowers behind her back. Laura says, I thought you said you didn't mean to interfere, to which her mother replies with this great line, my darling child, you wouldn't like a logical mother, would you? It's a rhetorical question implying I don't have to be logical. I want to be whimsical. It's a luxurious way to live and not needing to be logical, which is what I think Mansfield is trying to highlight. But I do say I kind of like the line. I may use that line myself.
Along with your other favorite line, if I contradict myself, I contradict myself.
It's the same idea. I don't
is.
want to be logical. Don't hold me to that.
Well, I would like you to be logical, but I don't know if it's in the best interest of someone talking to someone like this to say it.
Well, that may be true, and it may depend on the occasion. But speaking of occasion, I think the occasion of the moment is to let the Sheridans go for a bit. Nothing much has happened in our story so far, but we have been talking quite a bit. So we're in this beautiful place. And so just for now, maybe we should end things sitting in a beautiful garden. Imagine we're in Wellington, New Zealand, and all we see everywhere are roses and lilies. And of course, in the back, behind the marquee, a karaka tree.
Well, in that case, I guess I'll join you. And I hope you'll join us next episode as we not only finish reading The Garden Party, but we wrap up our discussion on one of the world's most celebrated modern short story writers, Katherine Mansfield. And thank you for listening. If you missed our first episode's discussion about Mrs. Mansfield and her short story, Miss Brill, go back and check it out. And we hope we've helped you understand this genre and why people love it so much, why they love short stories, and even if they've been called plotless. They are plotless, but that doesn't make them less fascinating. As always, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, a colleague, a fellow teacher, or a student of literature. And, share it via WhatsApp or text or social media or YouTube. And remember, you can find us at our website at howtolovelitpodcast.com. And from there, you can find all of our more than 300 episodes. And again, thank you for supporting us as we help make the teaching and learning of English literature enjoyable and accessible for as many people as possible.
Peace out.
This is a vacation with Chase Sapphire Reserve, the butler who knows your name. This is the robe, the view, the steam from your morning coffee. This is the complimentary breakfast on the balcony, the beach with no one else on it. This is The Edit, a collection of hand-picked luxury hotels you can access with Chase Sapphire Reserve, and a $500 Edit credit that gets you closer to all of it. Chase Sapphire Reserve, now even more rewarding.
Learn more at chase.com/Sapphire Reserve. Cards issued by JP Morgan Chase Bank and a member FDIC, subject to credit approval.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings by $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
With VerboCare, help is always ready. Before, during, and after your stay. We've planned for the plot twists, so support is always available. Because a great trip starts with peace of mind.